La Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're doing one verse, Canto 10, Chapter 51, Text 63, but we were missing a speaker for the last 2 days, so I'm going to read the English of Text 60, 61, and 62. And then we'll do the Sanskrit for today's verse 63, which is on the board. So the English, Text 60. The minds of non-devotees who engaged in such practices as pranayama are not fully cleansed of material desires. Thus, O king, material desires are again seen to arise in their minds. Krishna talking. Text 61. Again, Krishna's talking. Wander this earth at will with your mind fixed on me. May you always possess such unfailing devotion for me. And text 62, translation. Krishna continuing to King Muchukunda. Because you followed the principles of a Kshatriya, you killed living beings while hunting and performing other duties. You must vanquish the sins thus incurred by carefully executing penances while remaining surrendered to me. And now we come to text 63, today's text. So Sanskrit's on the board. Janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritamaha bhutva dvija varastvamvas. Sorry, my computer changed something. Mam upasyasi kevalam janmani anantara re rajan sarvabhuta suritamaha bhutva dvija varastam vai Mam upasyasi kevalam janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritamaha bhutva dvija varastam vai Mam upasyasi kevalam. Please chant. Janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritamaha bhutva dvija varastam vai mam upasyasi kevalam Janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritama bhutva dvija varastam vai mam upasyasi kevalam Janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritama bhutva dvija varastam vai mam upasyasi kevalam Janmani anantare rajan sarvabhuta suritama Utadvija varastambai mamamupasisi kevalam. The word for word, Janmani, in the birth, Anantare, immediately following, Rajan, O king, Sarva, of all, Bhuta, living beings, Surit Tamaha, a supreme well-wisher, Bhutva, becoming, Dvijavara, an excellent Brahmana, Tvam, you, Vai, indeed, Mam, to me, Upasyasi, will come, Kevalam, exclusively. So the translation to 663. O king, in your very next life, you will become an excellent Brahmana, the greatest well-wisher of all creatures, and certainly come to me alone. And the BBT purport. Shri Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita 5:29, Surdam sarva bhutanam, jnatva mam shantam richati. Quote, a person attains peace by understanding me to be the well-wishing friend of all living beings, close quote. Lord Krishna and his pure devotees work together to rescue the fallen souls from the ocean of illusion. This is the real purport of the Krishna consciousness movement. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to the 10th canto, 51st chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Deliverance of Muchukunda. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamlam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Ishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpataribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami iti namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, there's a commentary from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on this last verse of this chapter. And he has King Muchukunda asking. So you're not seeing it in the translation here, because the translation is, O king, in your very next life you will become an excellent Brahmana, the greatest well-wisher of all creatures, and certainly come to me alone. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is actually looking at what King Muchukunda, how King Muchukunda is processing what Krishna is saying. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that King Muchukunda is actually asking, when will I become your associate of Krishna? The reason this question is asked by King Muchukunda is that Krishna had told him Because you followed the principles of a Kshatriya, you killed living beings while hunting and performing other duties. You must vanquish the sins thus incurred by carefully executing penances while remaining surrendered to me. So that was the previous text. So at that moment, King Muchukunda had a thought when he heard Krishna say this. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives that thought. And this was King Muchukunda's response to hearing Krishna making this statement to him that he would actually have to execute penances because of the fact that he had done killing while hunting and executing his other Kshatriya duties. So this was King Muchukunda's thought. Alas, alas, Krishna wants to separate me from his association from now on. This can't be, this just can't be. So he was actually processing some sort of distress when he heard Krishna say that. And now we're hearing, the next thing he's asking Krishna is, when will I become your associate? So it's in response to King Muchukunda's verbalized question that Krishna answers in this particular verse that we're doing today, and this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So this is Krishna, an expansion on the verse today, and as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is commenting, Krishna is saying, after leaving this body, you will go to my abode in Vaikuntha. I give liberation and also residence in Vaikuntha even to my enemies in this incarnation. So what then to speak of an exalted devotee like you? In my past times, in a future incarnation, Janmadi Anantare, those were the words, you will associate with me as an essential participant. In your very next birth, you will be the best friend of all living entities. So the best friend of all living entities, Sarva Bhuta Surita Maha. At that time, you and I will act for their benefit by giving them transcendental knowledge as suits the circumstances. Becoming a universally respected and learned Brahmana, Dvijavara, you will attain me alone due to your lack of possessiveness and mood of renunciation. In other words, you will remain in my association. So, I've got a safety pin that belongs to the deities. Sorry. So, interestingly, in this BBT purport, the disciples of Srila Prabhupada are drawing attention to how it is that one becomes peaceful. Because there's a little bit of disturbance in Muchukunda because he's hearing Krishna saying to him, oh, you know, you're going to have to go and perform penances to rectify the killing that you did. And in the purport, the focus of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada is how it is that one becomes peaceful. So they draw attention to Krishna's statement in Bhagavad Gita 5:29. So this is that verse. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material existence. So that verse is Bhaktaram Yagna Tapasam Sarva Loka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarva Bhutanam Gnatva Shantim Richati. So there are similar phrases in this statement of Lord Krishna from Bhagavad Gita 5:29 and the words spoken by King Muchukunda. In particular, Lord Krishna is referring to the understanding one needs to come to in order to attain peace. Sorry, I said the words spoken by King Muchukunda, I meant Krishna speaking here. One needs to understand Krishna as the Supreme Lord. That's the means for coming to the understanding that one needs to come to in order to become peaceful. So one understands that Krishna is the Lord of all the planets and he's the Lord of the demigods. So there's no other way to be peaceful. You actually have to have it clear what the cosmic arrangement is. So that's Sarvaloka, of all planets, and Mahaswaram, Ishvaram, the Supreme Lord. And here Krishna tells King Muchukunda that he, King Muchukunda, will in his next birth become a supreme greatest well-wisher of all living entities, Sarva Bhuta, of all living entities. So although King Muchukunda is asking when he will become an associate of Lord Krishna, he's told by Krishna that he will remain in his association. So I'm going to explore this a little bit. Now, the reason Krishna says this is because King Muchukunda is in Krishna's association, by virtue of his having understood that Krishna is the beneficiary of all human activities. King Muchukunda knows this. And Srila Prabhupada reasons in the following way. Men should offer everything to the transcendental service of the Lord because he's the proprietor of all planets and the demigods thereon. So that's the reason. You actually have to offer everything in transcendental service to the Lord because he is the proprietor of everything, all the planets. So it doesn't matter which planet we're on, the earthly planet, but in every other planet, persons have to do the same thing. They have to offer all their activities in service to Lord Krishna. Now, the opposite position is described by Srila Prabhupada. And this is the opposite position. Under the spell of illusion, living entities are trying to be lords of all they survey, but actually they are dominated by the material energy of the Lord. So those are the two positions one can hold. Doesn't matter which planet you're on. So the explanation for how the first position takes place, meaning the position of offering everything in the transcendental service of the Lord, it actually works that if one's operating, because, we have an intelligence, so we have to operate in a particular way. So if in our intelligence we're carrying some knowledge that the Lord is dominant, or he's holding sway over the whole universe, or all the universes, and if one is working with this full knowledge of one's relationship with the Supreme Lord, then it's possible to be in that position of wanting to offer all one's activities in transcendental service to the Lord. So you have to have that knowledge, that understanding. And King Muchukunda, he's certainly working in this full knowledge of Lord Krishna's position. And the reason we know this is that he shows fear of being enticed by Krishna to enjoy his senses. So he's afraid of the second position. And he's afraid that Krishna is going to say to him, enjoy your senses and then later on you'll come to me. He's really afraid of that. And this is how King Muchukunda shows his fear of the second position. The one where, one is just wanting to lord it over whatever one's in one's control. For so long, I have been pained by troubles in this world and have been burning with lamentation. My 6 enemies are never satiated, and I can find no peace. Therefore, O giver of shelter, Supreme Soul, please protect me. O Lord, in the midst of danger, I have by good fortune approached your lotus feet, which are the truth and which thus make one fearless and free of sorrow. So that was from the 57th text in this chapter. So you can see King Muchukunda, he understands which position he's taken. He's acting in knowledge just by expressing in such a deep way that he definitely does not favor the position of just wanting to lord it over everything that is in his control, and in fact even enjoy that. He sees himself as actually being victimized in that position, because he says, my senses are never satisfied. And he says, I can find no peace. And remember, this is a king. He's supposed to have been completely unchallenged. There was no king who could stand up to him. So he had full control of everyone and everything. So he sees himself as actually being in the middle of danger because of having his senses and the position that he holds. But he acknowledges that he has actually taken the second position, because I've highlighted the two positions that exist there, whichever planet one's on, as per Srila Prabhupada. So he's taken that second position. He says, I've approached you, your lotus feet, which are the truth. And this is what he sees as the benefit of having that second position of offering things in transcendental service to the Lord and taking shelter of him. He says it makes one fearless and free of sorrow. And Srila Prabhupada states, so I'm quoting Srila Prabhupada, the perfection of this consciousness, Krishna consciousness, working in full knowledge of one's relationship with the Supreme, is full knowledge of Krishna. This full knowledge of King Muchukunda's relationship with Krishna, it's revealed. He actually has that full knowledge of Krishna. So he's at the peak of his Krishna consciousness. And this is the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that reveals how King Muchukunda has this full knowledge of Krishna himself. So this is quoting from the commentary for text 57. This is how Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti puts it, where King Muchukunda is speaking his thoughts. O super soul, who resides in everyone and therefore knows everything, I have taken shelter of your lotus feet. The fear of enemies and disease come along with winning the treasures of this earth. The treasures of heaven include impermanence, and the treasure of merging in Brahman cheats one of the service of your lotus feet. The treasure of your lotus feet, however, awards fearlessness, freedom from lamentation, and eternal life in your loving service. Therefore, please protect me who are afflicted with calamity and keep me sheltered at your lotus feet. So you can see King Muchukunda understands, he has knowledge of his relationship with Krishna. In fact, it's very full knowledge of Krishna himself, because he passes through all the different aspects of Krishna, as super soul residing in the heart, as Brahman, and finally as Krishna. And he's dismissing everything except actual shelter of Krishna, because again, it brings this freedom from lamenting and freedom from being fearful and sorrowful. And understanding that actually all the time one is getting afflicted with calamity. There's some kind of disaster that can happen at any time. Anyway, something comes to mind. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it comes to mind because I studied behavioral psychology, and a lot of emphasis was put on people having fears and how to deal with fears. And behaviorism has its roots in America. So it was American psychologists that tackled this problem. So somebody may have quite unusual fears. Like I remember one of the classic examples of fear in the psychology books was a person coming to a psychologist and being very fearful of turning on the tap, because the person feared that matzo meal was going to come running out of the tap. So instead of water, so the person had some sort of trauma associated with being fed things with matzo meal. I guess the person was a Jewish person. And so it meant that the person, because of their fear of turning on the tap, imagining that matzo meal was going to come pouring out of the tap, obviously the person couldn't bathe, couldn't cook. It was a problem, like a deep fear. So the way the behavioral psychologists deal with such a fear is like gradually, step by step, having the person get closer to the tap, step by step. So, some reinforcement is given for every step taken. So let's say the person's in the doorway and the tap's on the opposite side of the room. Every step the person would take, the psychologist would give reinforcement. Well done. How brave you are. Excellent. And then, gradually the person's taking those 10 steps to come close to the tap. And then when the person's at the tap, obviously it's the trauma moment because now they're right by the tap. But the psychologist gradually reinforcing, so, put your hand on the tap, reinforcement for putting hand on the tap, reinforcement for turning it a little bit. And eventually the person's able to turn the tap and destroy the illusion that they have that matzo meal is going to come out of the tap because water comes out of the tap. But it requires a lot of encouragement, a lot of reinforcement on the part of the psychologist for the person to overcome the fear. So I was just thinking about that because here is King Muchukunda, who is understanding that fearlessness has just come from actually the meditation on Lord Krishna's lotus feet. So here was a person meditating on matzo meal coming out of a tap. But just meditating on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna gives us freedom from expecting the worst. So King Muchukunda clearly understands this second position delineated by Srila Prabhupada. And this is Srila Prabhupada writing. Not about King Muchukunda, but in general. He comes into contact with Maya illusion due to the desire to lord it over Maya, and that is the cause of his many sufferings. So King Muchukunda, he explains his understanding. He knows this, the second position of the problem of wanting to lord it over Maya. So he puts it this way. With deep arrogance, I took myself to be the body, which is a material object like a pot or a wall. Thinking myself a god among men, I traveled the earth surrounded by my charioteers, elephants, cavalry, foot soldiers, and generals, disregarding you in my deluding pride. So you can see the depth of King Muchukunda's understanding of this problem of falling into illusion, because he paints the picture of how easy it is to actually see oneself as the lord of what is within one's control. And in fact, he even says, I took myself to be this king. I took myself to be a god amongst men. And he even paints the picture of traveling the whole earth surrounded by all these retinue of foot soldiers, cavalry, infantry, etc. But he acknowledges that that position means that he's disregarding Lord Krishna, just thinking like that. So, of course, King Muchukunda had to execute his work. I mean, he had to travel the world with his retinue of soldiers and cavalrymen and infantry. And Srila Prabhupada writes this, quoting him, as long as one is in contact with matter, he has to execute work in terms of material necessities. So it was correct for King Muchukunda to be surrounded by his retinue and to be traveling the world. It's just the matter of how one is perceiving one's work, how one is attending to what one needs to attend to materially. And that's the particular important factor, what knowledge one's carrying or what position one takes mentally as one's performing one's work. And Srila Prabhupada explains something of Lord Krishna's position. This is now looking from how Krishna is viewing things. So this is Srila Prabhupada. The Lord is not partial to anyone. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness, which helps one control the senses in every respect and conquer the influence of desire and anger. And one who stands fast in Krishna consciousness, controlling the above-mentioned passions, remains factually in the transcendental stage, Brahma Nirvana. So that's Srila Prabhupada. He's explaining what Lord Krishna's position is. He's not particularly favoring a king, or he's not particularly favoring a subject of the king. What the important component is in the relationship, in this position, taking the person taking this position of transcendental service to Lord Krishna, is that one is working hard to control one's senses. And you get that example in King Muchukunda. He actually is understanding the struggle with his senses, because he's talking about how, the mind allows him to see himself as a god amongst men. But he's, at the same time, he's saying, this is causing me to disregard you, meaning Lord Krishna. So it means that one has to be controlling the senses in every respect, and that's the important component, and that's what Srila Prabhupada's highlighting. Because if you're controlling the senses, like being very alert to what the mind is thinking, then it allows one to control one's desires and any anger. So, for instance, King Muchukunda, were he to have stayed in that position of thinking, I'm a god among the men, here is all my retinue, my cavalry, my foot soldiers, then it means he's fallen into the other position, the second position or the first position of actually wanting to lord it over whatever's in his control in the material realm. So, of course, if you do give way, if one were to give way to letting the mind go, then there's this problem that anger also comes because you may be challenged. So King Muchukunda may have got challenged immediately with, if he were thinking, I'm more superior to anybody else. So then anger comes if one's challenged, if one is permitting the mind to indulge in that kind of way of, seeing oneself in a particularly augmented position. So King Muchukunda, he exemplifies standing fast in Krishna consciousness. And here's how we know this. He says, my dear Lord, you have shown me mercy since my attachment to my kingdom has spontaneously ceased. Such freedom is prayed for by saintly rulers of vast empires who desire to enter the forest for a life of solitude. So extraordinary. He's understanding that he received some special mercy because of the fact that he is not attached to his kingdom. He says it's just spontaneously stopped, the attachment. And this is kind of hard to understand. I'll share something personal. Like some time back in my personal life, some work got severed for me. And I found it distressing, but naturally I went through it in a very calm, peaceful way because I understand that I'm not, the controller of what's happening. And just through going through that and in a very peaceful way proceeding with, putting everything in order internally, like working quite hard to put things in order internally, I came to a position of complete calmness and detachment. And it was very important to me what I was doing. So I can relate to King Muchukunda. Of course, in his case, it's obviously a vast empire that he's referring to, but coming to a point of spontaneously experiencing this, not being attached anymore. So it means there's a lot of internal work that has to be going on all the time, not only with controlling one's senses, but also at the same time always redirecting the mind to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. So now his practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness involved killing living entities while hunting. So this is the critical part, because we heard from Srila Prabhupada that one has to control the senses in every respect and conquer the influence of desire and anger. So it would mean, the king has to do some killing. I mean, as part of honing their skills for warfare is to do hunting. So you may sometimes come across old books that show photographs of kings in India, and often it'll be some mention of them having killed tigers, because that was a very fierce opponent. So that kind of killing was to hone the skills in warfare. Actually, they would go without any weapons and tackle a tiger. That's how fearsome these Kshatriya kings were. So Krishna has to make an evaluation because he has to consider, how well did Muchukunda do? Did he stay fast in his Krishna consciousness? So this is Krishna making an evaluation. You must vanquish the sins thus incurred by carefully executing penances while remaining surrendered to me. So that was Krishna evaluating King Muchukunda's controlling his mind and his senses and how fast he was staying in his Krishna consciousness. That was Krishna's evaluation. And Srila Vishwanath gives an interesting insight into Lord Krishna's evaluation of the practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness on the part of King Muchukunda. So he gives Krishna's thinking in making his evaluation. So this is very unusual. How would we possibly know without the insight of Srila Vishwanath? So this is Srila Vishwanath talking about how Krishna is making his evaluation of how well King Muchukunda did in his staying fast in his Krishna consciousness and executing his Krishna conscious duties. So, quoting, in this incarnation, this is Krishna's thinking, he should not associate with me directly. All my personal assistants in my pastimes have taken birth in Dvapara Yuga, such as Uddhava, Akura, Arjuna, and Yudhisthira. Muchukunda, however, is extremely old, having taken birth at the very beginning of this Manvantara. When people see him, they will laugh and say, aha, who's this very tall and stout man who is such a poor match for the Lord? Krishna's evaluation gives a second reason for not having King Muchukunda directly associate with him, this Krishna. Even now, during the pastime of fleeing from Jarasandha, as well as in later pastimes, such as the kidnapping of Rukmini, it will not be at all fitting for this person to be associated with me while I'm fighting the likes of Salva and others. He will take these opponents of mine and crush them like mosquitoes in his hands. What excuse can I therefore make to separate him from my association? So this is Srila Vishwanath giving insight into Lord Krishna making an evaluation, this critical thing of evaluating how well King Muchukunda has done in staying fast in his Krishna consciousness and in managing his senses, and how what Krishna's internal evaluation has to do with taking the circumstance into account. Because King Muchukunda's question has been, when will I be an associate of you? And Krishna's internal evaluation is basically that King Muchukunda is going to be out of place in the scenario. Physically, he's got a different form, having taken birth at a different time from everybody else. So he's very powerful, very tall. He's going to look out of place. And any opponent that's there, he's actually going to be able to crush them because he's so powerful, because he's from a different age, much bigger body, much more powerful, greater strength. So Krishna thinks, he can't be in this scenario. It doesn't suit these circumstances. So it's an unusual evaluation. So it's not a reflection on King Muchukunda not having been fast in his Krishna consciousness. It's just that King Muchukunda happened to have slept through so many yugas. So he was going to be out of place in the current circumstances. So there's a certain humor to Krishna's evaluation. He's not going to fit in. People are going to laugh. And also, they're going to say, he's not a good match with Krishna because, the man is so powerful that he's just crushing all the opponents. He's not giving Krishna a chance to show his glory. So it is that the perfection of King Muchukunda's knowledge in Krishna consciousness is going to see the highest perfection of his life be the service of giving transcendental knowledge in his next life as a respected Brahmana. So that's going to be King Muchukunda's perfection. And Lord Krishna makes note of King Muchukunda's renunciation. He points that out. And Srila Prabhupada writes, so this is Srila Prabhupada, real renunciation means that one should always think of oneself as part and parcel of the Lord and therefore think he has no right to enjoy the results of his work. That's proper renunciation. So as part and parcel, or thinking of oneself as part and parcel of the Lord, the results of work are to be enjoyed by the Supreme Lord. That's a natural consequence. So this is a proper renounced position. So it's not just an external renunciation like, a person's maybe who decides that, I remember there was a person many years ago when we were in the Tobacco temple, and the person's display of renunciation was to come and stand on one leg in front of a picture of Lord Nrsingadev. And he would stand there for a long time on one leg. So this was like, being renounced. And another person who practiced renunciation in that temple was a lady, and she would regularly fast, so not just on Ekadasi. She would go through long periods of fasting, so, being renounced from the body needing food stuff. So that's not proper renunciation, according to the definition given by Srila Prabhupada. The proper renunciation is actually always thinking oneself as a part and parcel of Lord Krishna, and thinking that therefore one doesn't have the result to enjoy the results of one's work. So the lady who's fasting may have actually been quite proud of the fact she was able to go for long periods of fasting. Or the man standing on one leg, he probably was quite pleased with himself that he was able to do it for whatever, an hour. So that's not the proper renunciation. Proper renunciation is thinking that one doesn't have the right to enjoy the result of one's work. So, and that's by implication, because one's a part of the Supreme Lord, and taking that first position, understanding that he's the superior person to whom everything belongs, actually that result is for him. The enjoyment is for him. So Srila Prabhupada continues that such a person becomes accustomed, if one's thinking in this way, one becomes accustomed to not taking pleasure in anything beyond the transcendental happiness derived from service to the Lord. So that's where one gets one's happiness, in the service one's performing for the Lord. And that's where, over time, one gets accustomed that that's where the happiness, where one's going to get pleasure and happiness, as opposed to, let's say, the second position of the pleasure is going to lie in something that's for my senses. So Srila Prabhupada notes, this is Srila Prabhupada, one who is satisfied in himself has no fear of any kind of reaction from his activities. So this is that freedom that King Muchukunda was referring to. One doesn't have a fear of any reaction from one's activity because one has this satisfaction in oneself, that one's just getting happiness from the service performed, the transcendental service performed to Lord Krishna, or giving the results of one's work as pleasure to be enjoyed by Lord Krishna. So it is that King Muchukunda is going to display this lack of possessiveness and this mood of renunciation, which will allow him to remain in Lord Krishna's association. So he will be very firm in that position. And as Lord Krishna states, one who is self-controlled and unattached and who disregards all material enjoyments can obtain by renunciation the highest perfect stage of freedom from reaction. So that's going to be, it has been King Muchukunda's good fortune, but Lord Krishna saw him as needing to come to a position of even further renunciation. So for him, it's going to be through actually going through taking birth in another life and using his transcendental knowledge to give it to others. So this is going to be his highest perfectional stage of freedom from reaction. So if there's any thought on this subject matter, I sort of, had to cover the many verses, so hence it was very much involved in summarizing and examining King Muchukunda.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for your class. You made a lot of wonderful points, and maybe you could expand on some of these points that you made, that you brought to mind when you made these points. Your point was that Muchukunda was realizing that whatever I see, whatever is that's entrusted to me by Krishna's plan, now I feel like I'm the Lord, the controller of it, and it's my duty to protect it. And but sometimes we see that this could cause, like you said, anger to arise when we realize we're not in control. Just like you said, whatever position you had in the past was taken away from you. You could scream, you could slander, you could go on Facebook. That probably won't make things better for you and make things worse. Just tolerate, be peaceful, and deal with the situation. And the reason I appreciate that, because we're not the lords of anything, because things can be taken away from us any moment. Other people are maybe instruments. But this is precisely what Jadabharta told King Rahugana. And a lot of times people say, you should, when people criticize you or slander you or etc., you should just tolerate, right? And not respond like Haridas Thakur. But I really appreciate this pastime. It gives an alternative to that, where Jadabharta is responding to being insulted by King Rahugana. He gives him some wisdom. He's not giving him curse words. That's usually what we do. So he says in 5th Canto, chapter 10, verse 11, I think is a very important point regarding what you said. He tells King Rahugana, he says, "My dear king, as far as you thinking that you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me, this is also incorrect because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant. But tomorrow the position may be changed, and you may be my servant, and I your masters. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. And there's something called in the 10th canto, chapter 45, verse 1. Basically, the reason I'm bringing this up is because usually when we responsible for a temple, usually think we have to protect the people in the temple, but this may cause offenses because you were mentioning we're not the Lord of anything. And there's a saying, the guardian of truth. Sometimes we think we're the guardian of truth. And this verse from the Bhagavatam is actually very beautiful. 10th canto, chapter 45, verse 1. So basically, in this world, sometimes we think when we have to, we're the managers of a building, a temple, a business, we may think I'm the guardians of truth. But this verse from the Bhagavatam says, actually, the truth is the guardian of us. It mentions that Mother Jasoda and Nanda Maharaj, the Yoga Maya was beginning to wear off like some anesthesia. The Yoga Maya was beginning to wear off, and then they realized, maybe our son, baby Krishna, is not an ordinary child. Maybe he is God, the absolute truth. But then Krishna was like, oh no, let me put this Yoga Maya cover on them. So therefore, they're thinking they're the protector of truth, Krishna, but actually the truth was the protector of them. And so the last point is I've found related to this verse, it's, and maybe you could expand on some of these points. Give me a second. It's a very important verse to nail the point home, I believe. So let's see. Sorry about this. So this is verses from the first canto, chapter 13, verse 46. It says, this gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of eternal time, kala, action, karma, and the modes of material nature, guna. How then can it, being already in the jaws of the serpent, protect others? So generally speaking, we say, I'm the protector of this building, but sometimes we may say, where's our controller? Where's our protector? He or she is at home sick. They couldn't protect themselves from the cold. So who's protecting? Krishna. And so we may say also, I'm the control of the Lord. But then we may say, where's our protector? This person couldn't protect themselves from lust or from greed. We're all under the modes of material nature. So my question to you is, it seems like there has to be a balance, correct me if I'm wrong, between being the manager, the controller of anything, it doesn't matter, but being detached when we see that control is taken away, because when that control is taken away, then we maybe commit offenses that make it worse, where then we realize we make our situation much worse, and then we leave also. So can you explain the balance between, yes, we have to do our duty, but at the same time, detachment from it when this control is taken away, like you perfectly exemplified when something was taken from you?
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the question you're raising is, as you put it, what's the balance you strike if you are in a position of overseeing or controlling some aspects, say in an institution like the temple, and you pointed out, bringing up 2 verses, one dealing with the temporary nature of a position through Jad Bharat's statement to the king, and that, in the future, in one's future life, a position may be reversed. And a second verse which pointed to the fact that the body itself is, subject to the influence of time. So, again, there's impermanence. So the common fact is the impermanence both of position and the body that one's occupying. So both on the gross level and on the subtle level, there's impermanence. So your question of what sort of balance does one have to have in order to be in that kind of position? So the balance is struck by the intelligence carrying that knowledge. Exactly those two verses that you've pointed out. One understands that actually, I'm in a temporary position physically, and also this position has been accorded to me. Of course, if it's in the temple, it would not just be destiny, which is what Jad Bharat was saying to the king. It's not just that it's necessarily fated. It's because one's performing service, it's sort of more a divine arrangement, but certainly it would be in relation to one's abilities and capacities. So the important thing is in the intelligence controlling the mind constantly, because it's an internal, personal work that one has to be done. So one performs the external role and the duties of the role, but the consciousness, the internal work is very personal. How one is viewing oneself in that role, how one is executing the role with all one's actions. Everything has to be done in a very pure way, that it's actually understanding that it's a service performed, a transcendental service that one's performing to the Supreme Lord on his behalf. One is actually, you use the word right in the beginning, that's one of the key factors in a transcendental service of any kind, and that is that, and I found this quote recently, and I found it so extraordinary, and I may have even mentioned it in a previous class. Devaki Devi Dasi, who visited this temple one time from Germany, she has this book called Krishna's Divine System. So she particularly points to the fact that the divine system has a hierarchy, with Krishna at the top of the hierarchy. Anybody who's below in that hierarchy is actually got the role of protection. They're protecting whoever's below them. So that's one of the key factors in the consciousness that one's carrying that allows for balance, understanding that one's role is one of protection for anybody below one. Because generally, if one slides into the second of those positions, because I highlighted Srila Prabhupada, there's two positions you can take always. If one forgets that one is in a role of protecting, but then slides into the position where the mind, holds sway. The minute the mind holds sway, oh, well, I'm in this position now. Let me see. I'm going to perhaps, it might be more suitable to have this person be here and not that person because, I get on better with this person. So there'll be less conflicts. So I'm just going to move this person out of the position. So I'll have somebody that I get on well with, makes my life easier. Now that's a decision that has unbalanced everything completely because one is forgetting that actually one's in the position of protecting. So if somebody is below one in a certain position, one protects that person in that position, whether one likes the person or doesn't like, but one does the main thing is the protection of their work, protection of their service. So the protection factor. And she highlights that the minute you take Krishna out of the hierarchy, that's when you get exploitation. That's what tips the balance completely. It becomes then an exploitative thing. What suits me? What is more comfortable for me? It's going to cause less hassle in my life. Or I favor this person, don't favor that person. It becomes a system of exploitation. And I really appreciated her insight into this. And fortunately, you asked this very nice question, so I've been able to bring that up. So staying with that consciousness that if one's in a position of leadership of any kind, one's in a position of protecting others in any other leadership role below one as well. So not even the general mass of devotees, but anybody in any leadership role. Whether one likes, doesn't like, prefers somebody else, it's not like that. Always protection. No, otherwise it slides into the exploitation. Thank you. There's no other thought. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for your class also and for sharing the personal experience. I was just thinking of that, how when devotees share their personal experiences, it's like the mercy aspect, because they don't have to do that, So thank you. And I was wondering if you could share a little light on how we hear the statement, the mind dwelling on the objects of the senses, one becomes a pretender or something. In the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks about becoming a pretender. What is that? Is it any way you could speak a little something on that?
Yeah, I don't know which verse you're referring to particularly, but yeah, that just makes sense that you can't be simultaneously in both positions. You can't be in the position of allowing the senses to get their way and at the same time be practicing a position of using one's senses in service to Lord Krishna. The two don't go together. You have to constantly rein in the senses. So the senses will want to go, but you rein them in. So if you're not reining in the senses, you've already gone into that position of wanting to lord it over the material world or everything in one sway. So the two are incompatible. So naturally, it's not that one does have complete control over one's senses, and there has to be allowance for a certain amount of sense gratification. But it has to be done in a very regulated way, because one understands the senses need also what's the sensory input. So, but one does it in a regular way, a very regulated way. Once a week, I have this amount of time to, whatever it is, read this or look at that or hear that. So very regulated. And then that keeps one very safe in the position of using the senses in transcendental service to Lord Krishna and keeping one's consciousness and intelligence very clean and clear. Because if you do give sway, King Muchakunza puts it, you slide into all kinds of desires, or you slide into anger, because you're not getting what you want. So you have to give space to the senses, but regulate it. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.